I rarely begin a session by opening up what we left off with last time. So I'm pretty loyal to this, except with client response specificity when this beginning actually causes problems for a client. I begin every session by saying, where should we begin? I mean, that's like actually where I begin every session. I say, hey, welcome. I would really suggest, I think it's very ineffective to say to a client in the first 5 minutes, how are you doing today? I think it's pretty ineffective to ask, how was your week? Right? Because a lot of times, they're not doing well today, or they're doing great, and their weeks have been chaotic and crazy. And when we ask, like, how are you today? Like, it's so easy to welcome them in and say, how are you doing, Jean-Paul? I say, oh, I'm doing pretty well, thanks for asking. I usually don't reciprocate that question. Because when we ask that question of how are you doing today, it usually doesn't actually take us to the treatment focus. It takes us to the cow. And the cow is the crisis of the week. COW, crisis of the week. Call it the cow. It a lot of times kind of brings us to issues that are not of our primary treatment focus. Now, if we're really doing what we're doing, we can find those areas that connects. But when we kind of do this generic mood check, I think it has a tendency for clients to get away from what they actually want to talk about. Now again, there's client response specificity. We'll do that differently with each client. But it's pretty rare that I'll open up saying, last time we talked about your mom and dad, let's pick up there, right? Because that's me stepping into the driver's seat and controlling what we talk about. Now, when something really significant happens in the last session, and I'm not the most artful at doing this, usually I might bring that up at the beginning of the session. I say, as we're getting started here, I just wanted to say that I really appreciated, last session I felt like we were just really able to connect over some places of real vulnerability. So I just wanted to let you know that I saw that, I felt that, I really appreciated being able to be there with you. And we could certainly talk about that at the beginning of this session if you'd like. But if there's something else that's on your mind, we can begin with whatever feels most important. And so it's kind of like I'm noting that this thing was important that happened. I'm not just like, who cares? But I'm still leaving it in the client's lap for what to talk about. So, but short answer, yes, we could follow up. So, yeah, cool. Yeah.
So do you ask the question how was your week when you ask that question?
Nope, not normally.
Why was that?
Because I think it's too narrow of a question. And because I think it's too much of a heavily socialized question. So that question kind of elicits an automatic response. I'm okay. You're not okay. Rarely are we okay, right? How are you? I'm good, right? So it's just, I try to tend to lean away from questions that are kind of part of our typical social dialogue because they continue this narrow social dialogue that doesn't take us to the heart of the issue.
But it's better than asking.
I wouldn't say, I don't know that there's one way or another. And again, it's client response specificity. I like, and I think the interpersonal method is, where would you like to begin today? Or what's most important for us to begin with? As you settle in here, what do you notice coming up at the beginning of the session? So I guess this is the key. I try to honor the present moment, and I actually kind of don't always think it's helpful to begin session in a reflective mindset, because then the whole session will kind of, well, this happened, and then this happened, and then this happened, and it's like I'm remembering what happened, but I'm not actually present to it. And what I want to help clients do is to be present now. Now, if you want to be present now and talk about what happened next Tuesday, say, I want to talk about what happened on Tuesday. I was just super stressed over my exams, whatever. I would say, okay, bring me in on what Tuesday was like. What was happening then and there for you that was so overwhelming? And then we're not reflecting on Tuesday, we're actually stepping into Tuesday. Yeah, Nick? Did you have a question?
Yeah.
No. Was there another question that I saw? Cool. So we will continue with the attachment continue with attachment. We started on dismissive, is that right? What's that? Okay. This is going to be later, but I just wanted to get this up there. Hopefully we'll get to it. So again, remember that the attachment quadrants are made up of this dimension of anxiety and avoidance. And anxiety really is about approach. It's about will you be there. And a simple way, although this is probably not like completely technically correct, a simple way to think about it is that anxiety is about proximity. Like, can I come and be around you physically? And avoidance is about intimacy. Can I come and be close to you emotionally? Right? So we can trust that somebody will be there like a brick no matter what, but that doesn't mean that we trust that we'll be able to be emotionally open with them. Right? Yes?
Alright, one thing I think from last class is like with avoidance is that also like you could have someone you could open to but you choose not to.
No, that's what avoidance is.
Okay.
Avoidance is the fear of opening up. Do I avoid intimacy? So it plays both ways, right? So in childhood, people develop an avoidant style of coping because there aren't people that are available to them to be emotionally intimate with. But that, remember, the key is that these experiences become stable states of being after childhood. So it's not just like, oh, my mom wasn't really ever there emotionally for me, but now I graduated childhood and I put that all behind me and I'm able to, connect with whoever. It's like, okay, my mom was never able to be there for me, and so now it's hard for me to trust that other people will be. So in adults, right, in adults who have this type of attachment style, that's precisely the problem. A lot of times there are actually people in their lives who are available to be emotionally close with them. For example, the therapist is there to be emotionally close with them, right? Good therapist. But because of their internal working model and their previous experiences, that's kind of limited. Does that make sense? Excellent question. So anxiety is the concern of whether they will be there for support, and avoidance is about intimate closeness. And these two things create these four different categories of attachment. Dismissive clients are low in attachment anxiety, so they have no problem knowing that people will be there oftentimes, but high in avoidance. So they're not actually going to really open up very often. Preoccupied clients, on the other hand, are high in anxiety about seeking support and understanding from others, but are low in avoidance of expressing this need. So the preoccupied client feels pretty nervous to kind of bring up their issues, but they have no problem kind of opening the floodgates and sharing a lot. However, after they share a lot of times they're still not sure, like, oh, was that okay to share? Did that person really care? Is that person really going to be there? Are they judging me? And then fearful individuals have both. Yeah.
No, but like, for preoccupied, what if someone...
This is not preoccupied. Don't look at this for attachment, just for the record, guys. Yeah.
For preoccupied, though, it's like, couldn't it be because of the anxiety you have about sharing emotions, like, that has you avoid it?
Yeah, there could be a lot. I mean, there could be a lot of different kind of intrapersonal dynamics for why you'd be afraid. But generally here, we're not looking at the client's fear of their own experiences. We're looking at the client's fear of interpersonal experiences.
Yeah, what I'm trying to get at is, like, you might have, like, two people who, like, both share their emotions, or, like, what's going on, or two people who don't, and, like, one person can be preoccupied and one dismissive, but, like, what's going on internally for the dismissive, I'm just thinking out loud, okay. The dismissive is that, like, they're, like, removed from the emotion, and they either they share it and that they don't really care that much, or they don't share it because they they're removed from it. An anxious person would share it because they do care and they're anxious about it. But they're worrying about like if you'll respond to them, and like be there with them. But then, they won't share it because they're anxious and they're fearing like that's like the same reason.
Not quite, because that would be dismissive, right? Now, I mean, what we're looking here too is, we can get into the minutiae and split hairs, but we're looking at kind of broad generalizations. And this is both the strength and the weakness of attachment literature and attachment research, right? So this is what I think you all as students probably experience a lot, is like, which attachment style am I? I'm kind of this, but I'm also kind of this. But I have this quality, but I don't have that quality. Unfortunately, where the attachment styles are the most clear are in more extreme situations. I think that attachment literature and attachment theory has done a lot for the field for saying like, hey, there's these kind of broad categories of relating, but it's also a limited perspective, right? Like this framework just kind of gives you a general sense. It's kind of like saying, okay, I know where this person grew up in this city, right? If you look at a city, right, like New York, right, just knowing where somebody grew up and was born, that can kind of tell you in your gut like a lot of probably what to expect from that person. But there could also be a lot of differences, you know? So that's kind of what like attachment theory is about. It kind of tells us relationally where this person kind of came from, what their intrapersonal kind of cultural and expectations are. But it doesn't quite pin them down except in the experiences of extreme, if that makes sense. So again, dismissive individuals are just not going to approach with problems very often, but they don't really have a fear of whether people will be there or not because they have a pretty good image of themselves. Whereas preoccupied clients are willing to disclose emotionally to other people, but they feel very highly anxious of whether those people actually want to be there to support them or not. The history of dismissive individuals is caregivers ignored, rejected, and withdrew when the individual was distressed. And what they learned and internalized is emotional support will not be there when you need it. The way they've resolved this problem, that emotional support will not be there when you need it, is to not need it. And that's the token of dismissive individuals. Their interactions, they'll distort others as being controlling, hostile, and intrusive. There's a lot of externalization with dismissive clients. And they're going to minimize or deny any need for somebody else, because that's what helps them the most, is if you don't have needs, you can't get rejected. Again, it's not effective, as Nick said, to ask these clients, oh, what about your mom? What about your dad? We really, again, want to follow where the clients are going and stick with what the clients find is most important. Early in treatment, you're likely to feel bored with these clients, right? You're likely to feel like, oh, there's like not really anything going on here. This session isn't really moving. It doesn't have the sparks. Or you might have questions to yourself. Does this person even really want to be here in therapy? Like, do they even really want to be here, right? Those are counter-transference reactions, right? And the client pulls this from other individuals, right? By shutting down themselves, if other people can feel like this person doesn't even want to talk about their emotions, then they don't have to talk about their emotions, right? So you're likely to feel bored by this client, and that boredom is actually a sign, can be a sign, of what's happening in this client's internal world. The absence of emotion, right? The absence of connection, the shutting down of emotionality. These clients are compulsively dependent. They avoid intimacy or closeness. And our goal here is to not force emotions. We are not asking how, these clients, the question of how do you feel? It's pretty ineffective, and that actually usually kind of goes across the board. That question is kind of the classic therapist tome. How do you feel about that? How do you feel about that? That's not meeting the client where they're at. And so what we do want is to watch for points of entry, right? When these clients get frustrated, right? We want to identify those points of entry and then again, develop an internal focus. Oh, seems like you were pissed about what your boss said on Tuesday. Can you tell me like what was happening interiorly as that situation played out? The other aspect of dismissive clients is that because oftentimes they come from authoritarian households, they're very sensitive to control dynamics. So these clients often think that relationships can just occur in two ways. Either you're on the top and you're in control, or you're on the bottom and you're submissive. And that's kind of the only way oftentimes dismissive individuals see relationship. Either you're in control or you're submitting. And there isn't a recognition that actually you can be peers. You don't have to be controlled by others, nor do you have to control other people. There are actually relationships where neither of you has to be in control. You can kind of just both be together. And so this is one of the reasons that we want to avoid control dynamics. One of the easiest ways to activate these control dynamics is homework. With dismissive clients especially, we want to be sensitive and kind of avoid giving a lot of homework because they will likely see this just as another experience of their parents telling them what to do and not really being sensitive to what they actually want to do. Yeah.
In the beginning of our classes, you did mention that homework, or you think homework is ineffective.
Yes.
With the current attachment styles that we are studying, which attachment style would homework be effective with?
This is why I don't really like homework. Because a preoccupied client will probably do the homework because they believe that if they don't, what would happen?
Someone's gonna get mad at them.
Who's that someone?
Whoever's in control.
Therapist, right? A dismissive client is probably going to look at homework like, dude, this person's trying to control me, right? A fearful client is their life is going to be so chaotic, they're not going to have a time to do the homework. So
Would you tell them, would you suggest for them to do something? Like, for instance, would you tell them, like, if someone's experiencing anger, would you like to tell them, like, have you tried, working out or something like that?
yeah. That is something. That is actually the really effective way to do it. What's been helpful for you in the past to deal with the anger? When you felt anxious in the past, what's been helpful, right? So here you're actually drawing on the client themselves rather than initiating. Oh, well, yeah, actually, I had a real good 6 months when I started my new job and I was on a routine and I was working out every morning. I actually noticed that I wasn't as angry. I say, oh, wow. It sounds like that exercise was actually a really helpful way for you to get out some of that energy and anxiety and feel less angry. That sounds like something that might be worth considering. But then you can ask, like, is that something you would want to start doing again? So you're not imposing exercise is a great way to decrease anger. You should exercise 5 times a week. It's like, dude, who the hell are you? You don't know my schedule, right?
So you're trying to initiate the idea to the client, but for the client to say it. So you're kind of giving hints, but you want the client to say, well, this is what helped me.
Let's frame it this way. You are welcoming the client to say, hey, could we both look at what's been helpful for you in the past and see if any of that stuff might fit here, right? So you're not like really playing a game or anything. You're genuinely asking, like, what's helped with your anger before? You're kind of saying like, hey, do you have any sense for what would be helpful for yourself now? That's all you're doing. Now something preoccupied clients probably would be the most amenable to homework because what they have, right, what's their typical defense style? What's their kind of go-to defense?
That they're going to do with fear.
Fear. Think about how do they deal with emotions? What do they do with emotions in order to protect themselves and establish security with the caregiver?
Keep them in.
Preoccupied. 2 kind of main attachment defenses. Exaggerate their feelings, right? Hyperactivating, right? So a preoccupied client likely learned in order to get the help I need to make my feelings bigger. And so these clients oftentimes really overwhelm other people in their lives. And so these clients really benefit from some emotional regulation help. But we want to be careful in the way that we do it. And I usually will offer it kind of like, hey, this has helped a lot of people that I've worked with in the past. Some people love it, some people don't love it. Let's do this. What if I just guide you through my mindfulness exercise right now, because it seems like it would be helpful. And if you really like it, we can talk about how you can make it a part of your routine to help manage the stress. And if you don't like it, we can explore other possibilities. But it seems like it would be a good collaborative goal for us to help you in managing these big emotions. The key is that you want to establish the goal collaboratively to manage the emotions, and then you can kind of offer possibilities rather than saying, do mindfulness because your emotions are too big, right? So I think this is the key. The challenge with homework is that it tends to create an authoritarian, up-down, hierarchical relationship. If you can avoid that hierarchy, then homework can be really, really effective. I've not really found an effective way to do that. Now that's also because I probably tend towards being authoritarian in terms of I'm very sensitive to control dynamics. And as much as I say like, hey, I don't want homework to be something that like, did you do it or not? I can just feel it when I bring up like, hey, how's the meditation been going really recently? It's like, I'm sorry, John Paul. I haven't really been doing it very much. Once you're in that place of the client believing that they let you down, whether you feel that way or not, it's kind of difficult to get out. Yeah. Yes.
In that situation, like, how would you like come back from that and like reconcile that with the client? Like, if they were like, oh, I'm really sorry, I let you down, I didn't do this, and then like because like they feel like they let you down, even if you don't feel like they let you down, like how would you reconcile?
Yeah, I would probably ask the question of like, how did you let me down?
Like I know you were talking about how you wrote the homework, but like I didn't do the homework that you wanted me to do. I didn't work out 5 months a week. I didn't blah 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 blah.
Yeah. It sounds like you feel really guilty because it feels like I set this expectation of the things that you need to do this week. You didn't do it, and now you're feeling a lot of guilt. Mm-hmm. And then I would explore right in the process, like, that's actually not how I feel about it. I see it a different way. I see it that there's some things that we've identified that are really helpful for you to do that you like, and if you can do them, they're help you to regulate your emotions. But it's not like something you need to do for me. It's actually something that we're just trying to figure out, what's the best recipe for you? Your life might be a little bit too busy right now to do all that stuff. It sounds like you've had a pretty busy week. So maybe it would actually be more helpful rather than focusing on whether you're letting me down or not, if we could help you to give yourself a little bit more grace when you know things would be helpful, but you have a hard time doing them. Mm-hmm. I'd explore that. Yeah.
Couldn't that be a good situation for corrective emotionalists?
Yeah, absolutely. That's exactly it. Yeah.
So homework is good. Can you give this?
Maybe. I don't think we need to go looking for those. We do not. Actually, I think a lot of harm can come from the mentality. We don't need to orchestrate a problem in order to create emotionally corrective experience. We'll throw problem. If we're self-aware, we'll realize that we have plenty of times when we drop the ball to create a corrective emotional experience. We don't need to kind of manufacture anything like that. But yes, when control dynamics emerge in homework, it can be a great emotional corrective experience.
So, just to go over it, homework, no bueno when it's eliciting with the control dynamic.
Correct.
And maladaptive behaviors, but those are opportunities for corrective emotional experiences.
Yes.
And
I want to be clear, this is my kind of style and my take on homework, right? So I think you'll find other therapists who would really disagree with me. I think you'll find therapists who say, oh no, you need to do homework. That's how people practice. And if they're not practicing outside a session, how could they change? So there's different theoretical. What's that?
Some generalization is like generalizing.
I wouldn't say so. I wouldn't look at it the same way.
Because that'll happen naturally.
Yeah. Well, you support it, but I would never call that homework. I would never say, hey, let's talk about you standing up for yourself in your relationship with your partner. I wouldn't say that's homework. I would say that's us exploring what are the problems, how could you resolve them. So that's the kind of thing that'll kind of happen a little bit more naturally in generalization, but there's no need to call it homework. And I think it really avoids the hierarchy dimensions. Now there's some therapeutic protocols that require homework. Something like prolonged exposure therapy, and I assign when I'm doing PE, right? It's a different theoretical orientation than the interpersonal process. I give clients homework to practice every day, right? Because that's the protocol. So it's not homework it's not homework that's the issue. It's the control dynamics, right? And homework is a vulnerable point to eliciting control dynamics. But like you said, Jean-Paul, it's an excellent opportunity when those control dynamics are felt from the client to provide a corrective emotional experience. So we want to, rather than forcing feelings, we're looking for points of entry with the individual. This is oftentimes the developmental experience that was missed. A parent seeing like, oh, like you're frustrated. Tell me about that. We're making these small, modest emotional empathic bids. And we're kind of looking for that dismissive attachment style as like a wall. And when we see a little crack opening up, of like, yeah, man, I just felt let down by my boss again. You felt let down, like disappointed. Like they really dropped the ball and you were left to have to clean it all up. That sounds like it was a real bummer, right? We're making these small bids, looking for that point of entry. And if we do that consistently, we are offering the dismissive client what they didn't get the opportunity for, right? Which was, we're offering them a new opportunity, which they missed, but they needed, which is recognizing their own emotional world and learning to explore it. The other aspect is we really want to be careful not to take the client's dismissiveness personally. If we do, we will just be recreating the same problematic relational pattern, right? So the client not caring, the client being disengaged, it's not about you. It's about them. And when we make it about us, which we often do if we put too much emphasis on us as a therapist being liked, which likely most of you will do, right? Because most of us in the field are in the field because we've gotten pretty good at taking care of other people in order to kind of be liked and welcomed. You will really struggle with dismissive clients because you'll feel like, oh, this person doesn't like me and I feel incompetent and I feel uncomfortable. We really need to just be present with them, to go at their own pace, to not take the dismissiveness personally, and continue to provide that safe haven. Cool. Let's talk about preoccupied clients. So these clients have that hyperactivating style. These clients have a hyperactivating style. So they have learned that their needs will not be met. And because their needs are not met, what they've learned is to make their needs bigger, right? It's like if I can't hear what somebody's saying, they've learned nobody's hearing what I'm saying, so I'm going to say it louder and louder and louder and louder. You can almost imagine a child growing up with a parent who had issues with their hearing, right? Had maybe kind of like a partial deafness. And so the kid learned, when I'm talking to dad, I need to kind of yell. I need to yell. And that was true with dad. But then this kid walks around and is like, hey guys, how are you? In a small coffee shop, right? So that's kind of emotionally the perspective here with preoccupied clients. They are terrified of abandonment. they are terrified that they are going to be left, or that their caregiver won't be able to provide the help that they needed. There's a similar experience as the dismissive style, but they respond to it differently, right? The dismissive style turns it down, the preoccupied client turns it up. And they are so preoccupied with whether they'll be abandoned, what other people think about them, whether other people will be there or not, that their minds are filled with the thoughts of other people, right? Tiber talks about there is not space in their mind for their own mind. These clients really struggle with differentiation. They struggle with being their own person, where the dismissive client struggles with being in a relationship with someone and being able to depend on someone. The preoccupied client struggles with independence. Yes, John Paul?
Can you elaborate on differentiation?
Differentiation is being your own person. And differentiation of self is a concept developed by Murray Bowen, who was a family systems therapist. And what he said was that the role of the family is to help the individual to differentiate. And to differentiate means that they are able to balance two fundamental polarities of the human person. We are all called towards individuality. We are all truly our own person. And at the same time, we are all called towards togetherness. There's a sense where we really only exist as a community, right? That's a dynamic, that we both can only exist in community, and also we actually are fully our own person. That dynamic tends for us to polarize on one side or the other. Murray Bowen said that differentiation of self is the goal of the family. And it's the process whereby an individual is able to hold both of those things at the same time. So the dismissive client will tend towards autonomy, right? Polarize towards autonomy. I'm the only person that matters. I know how to do things, other people don't. Whereas the preoccupied client will tend towards togetherness or enmeshment, right? They are too close. The dismissive client is too far. And so the preoccupied client has learned to increase their emotional neediness in order to make sure that that closeness is not expanded, that individuals stay close to them and remain in intimacy. Preoccupied clients always want more. There's never enough closeness for the preoccupied client. And the preoccupied client is constantly afraid. When you tell a client, I'm going to go on vacation this summer for a month, right, which we should let our clients know in advance. Oftentimes, preoccupied clients will actually have a very intense emotional reaction. They'll feel like they were being left because this was their experience in childhood, that they were emotionally abandoned. That doesn't necessarily mean physically, but they had emotional needs, and those emotional needs were left hanging. Yeah, jump.
So Bob is preoccupied.
Bob?
What about Bob?
I've actually never seen What About Bob. I know.
We should do a class movie.
Class movie, yeah. That would, maybe we'll get hands up for who would like a class movie instead of a role play, a lecture, or a...
And then you can give a little lecture on the movie.
Yeah, that'd be fun. Who knows? Probably. From what I've heard about the story, probably. The history is that caregivers themselves were self-absorbed, or the caregivers themselves were preoccupied. This caregiver's self-absorption and inconsistent, unpredictable responsiveness resulted in the child exhibiting this intense neediness and maximizing their emotions in order to get through. What's most difficult about preoccupied attachment is that it's an intermittent reward schedule. So when we talk about reward schedules, right, this is B.F. Skinner, behaviorism, all this stuff, right? The most addicting form of reward schedule is kind of random. This is what happens in the casinos. Gambling is one of the hardest addictions to break because you can sit there and you can say, I'm going to win, I'm going to win, I'm going to win. And sometimes you don't win, but then sometimes you win and you make a lot of money. With a fixed interval schedule, right? Every time you smoke pot, you feel better. Every time you smoke pot, you feel good. Every time you smoke pot, you get high, right? That's fixed. And it's actually easier to let go because you know what's going to happen when you smoke, and you know what's going to happen when you smoke more. With something like gambling, it's not so, right? And so it actually creates a kind of greater obsession because this person is trained to be in the suspense of maybe this time I'll get it for much longer. And that's the experience of preoccupied clients, because at times, preoccupied clients' caregivers were actually emotionally available to them. They were actually able to give them the help that they need, or to give them the affection or the nurturance or the care. At times they really showed up, but then at other times they didn't. So these clients kind of learned to hang in that cleft and be obsessive over whether their needs were going to get met or not. And so they kind of go back and forth, preoccupied clients, from being very, very, stuck in their own world to trying to be controlling with others, right? Well, you should be able to see me at this time, or you should be able to see me at that time, right? These clients have a way of kind of reaching in and trying to control your behavior to make sure that your care is there. And they're pretty vigilant and overreactive to the therapist, right? So if the therapist mentions something about having another client, right? One of the things these clients might be preoccupied with is, I feel like, how could you care about me when you have another client in the next hour, right? These clients are pretty sensitive to anything that might point in the direction of abandonment. The transference and countertransference that you can expect is that initially in sessions, what do you think it's going to feel like to be with a preoccupied client? Let's say maybe a higher functioning preoccupied client. Yes. So how do you think that's going to feel for a therapist? In the first couple sessions, right? These clients they're good at figuring out, how do I connect with this person? Yeah. These clients come in and say, okay, this is what I want to work on. I'm having a really hard time in this relationship. I'm having a really hard time in that relationship. Sometimes it'll feel overwhelming, but a lot of times it'll actually feel like, oh my gosh, right? This person's coming in. They're ready to do the work. These clients are good at figuring out how to connect with people. The issue is that connection is never enough connection, right? And so it's amplified. And so a lot of times these clients too, one of the things that you'll see is indiscriminate sharing in the first couple sessions. So I think somebody had the question before of, do you ever have clients that come in and just kind of say everything that's going on? And that's probably, yeah, Nick, that was your question. Like, isn't that probably pretty good if clients are willing to just come forward and share everything? It tells you that if this client is willing to come and just share everything with me on the first session, they probably do that with a lot of people, right? And we can say, oh, well, I'm just a trustworthy therapist, but they don't know you, right? And what we can actually take from that is that the way the clients interact with us tells us this person has pretty loose boundaries. They're willing to tell a lot to someone that they don't know very well, and that kind of helps us develop our working hypothesis. The other thing that's striking about these individuals is that they will really press the therapist for reassurances rather than actually trying to do the work, right? So they'll want kind of the verbal, like, you're doing a great job, like, keep doing it. Like, yes, you're making progress, right? These clients will be like, am I doing okay? Am I doing okay? Am I doing okay? And they'll be kind of like obsessed with if they're doing okay, which actually stops them from just stepping in and saying like, dude, I'm gonna get after it today. Like, I'm gonna do the work. And these clients also, because of their neediness, oftentimes are asking for help, but because they're so stuck in that anxiety, they're not able to receive it. So there can be a real frustration oftentimes with that therapists might feel towards the preoccupied clients. The probably most likely two countertransference reactions that a therapist will have, the feelings that they'll have towards the client, are just feelings of overwhelm, of this person's too needy. They are too much. I can't help them. They want too much from me. Or the second would be frustration, right? This person's asking for help, but then they're rejecting it. Yeah?
I would assume the therapist would feel romantically connected to this client.
Romantically? Yeah. Very likely. So these clients will learn. These clients are really good at establishing connection, right? So there's kind of the subset, which would be kind of histrionic clients, which have learned how to use their own attractiveness and appeal, oftentimes kind of very strong sexual undertones, for how to kind of establish security with the caregiver.
Would you say that's some source of manipulation? Are they good at manipulation?
Yeah, but some maybe. Again, right? I don't think it's. There's a lot of different subtypes too, right? So preoccupied can look a lot of different ways, but it's very likely that if you have a client like this. So manipulation. Short answer, yes. Long answer, no. Because if we can reframe manipulation to say an adaptive strategy to getting their needs met, then yes, right? But I don't think that it's always as conscious as we think that it is. I don't think these clients are saying, oh, I got them wrapped around my finger. Now sometimes there's a little bit more insight, but a lot of times these clients are just kind of like running on the treadmill. And the way they've learned to run on the treadmill is to make my needs bigger, then I'll pull you in. Yeah.
How can you tell the difference between like a client who's preoccupied and just like worried about it versus like a client who's like overly self-aware and just like really needs help or like wants to say everything's wrong with them?
They might be the same client, but the difference is the observing self. That what we would call kind of like ego integrity, or the observing ego. So there's a certain kind of conscientiousness. And this is really kind of the biggest factor, I think, that predicts success in therapy, is how well individuals are able to be reflective. So it will feel, the other part of it is it'll feel different, right? You won't feel, so this is where our work is really, really important. Because in order for us to be able to trust our feelings, we need to be able to trust our feelings. And in order to trust our feelings, we need to go down there and do the work therapeutically and make sure that our feelings are, that we know how to discern them, we know what they're about, we know the histories, we know the stories that we've experienced. Because your feelings towards the client are a remarkably helpful diagnostic tool, right? For example, you might feel overwhelmed by a client because they remind you of your mom, and that might be kind of like totally on you, and this client might kind of just have a normal presentation. Or you might be overwhelmed with a client because they have an overwhelming style of relating to other people, and you're just feeling the kind of natural pull that they have. So you'll feel differently with each client, and over your development as a therapist, I hope that you each learn how you can trust those internal feelings as actually kind of diagnostic markers. Yeah. So these clients are intensely engaging in the initial sessions, very communicative, highly expressive emotionally, but there's a lot of what would be considered like the borderline kind of defenses of really trying to engage, but then very terrified, very afraid if there's any threat or hint at abandonment. Yeah, you'll learn this later, but your perspective of what a threat of abandonment is will really, really expand as a therapist, because when somebody's afraid of abandonment, they can see it in anything, because they've learned, right? Mom might not be there. Right? So I need to look for all the reasons that she might not be there, and then I need to pull her back in close. Dad might not be there. I need to look at all the reasons he might not be there and pull him back close. And that same pattern is going to show up with you. A lot of the diagnoses, right, generalized anxiety disorder, borderline personality disorder, eating disorders, suicidality as a means of coercing attention, cutting, self-injury, a lot of kind of internalizing disorders. You'll see more with the preoccupied clients, you'll see more of kind of a tilt towards anxiety and anxious presentation, whereas with the dismissive clients, you'll see more of a depressive tint, a depressive tilt. What they need from the therapist is a secure base. They need a therapist that can contain their emotionality, who isn't overwhelmed by the overwhelm, who can sit in the storm and be like, wow, this is a gale, right? Like it is coming down, it is raining, but it's like, but I could be here with it, right? That's what these individuals need. They don't need a therapist that's so insistent on being competent and helpful that they run in and try to put out every fire, right? They need a therapist who is able to weather the emotionality. Yeah.
A thought I just had is that, do some preoccupied clients, like, they're assessing, like, how can I prevent abandonment? But one of those, and we were talking about a lot of them, like, want to, like, share their emotions and stuff, but they're anxious of abandoning that. Do some clients, like, they learn that sharing their emotions can cause abandonment, so, like, they have, like, a paradox where, like, so like, they're not overly sharing, and, like, maybe they're expressive in all these other ways, but then when it gets to, like, the core issues, like, they keep from that because that's when they feel the abandonment.
Yeah, I think so. And I think those are kind of what we would consider, probably shows up a lot with borderline defenses, right? That there are layers to this and there's intricacies. And this is actually why I think that we really need to loosen up on attachment theory, because it doesn't have all the answers. Attachment theory can help us to learn a lot about ourselves and the ways we expect to act. It can tell us a lot about our clients and the ways we can expect them to act. But attachment theory does not have all the answers. And if we try to find all the answers by pegging ourselves or our clients in one attachment style, we're probably going to do more harm than good. Take attachment theory as a spirit of the law over the letter of the law thing. Again, it's going to tell us kind of the regional area where somebody comes from culturally, right? We probably have a sense for what somebody's going to be like if they're on the East Coast versus the West Coast, right? We probably have a sense of what someone's going to be like if they're from the North, whereas if they're from the South, right? We aren't going to peg them down and put them in a box, but that's kind of what attachment theory can kind of help us to do, is say, like, okay, I'm kind of getting these vibes, and it can help us to work towards, it can help us do two things: develop a stronger working hypothesis and guide our interventions, right? So we know that a preoccupied client actually needs encouragement to be their own person. Where if we encourage the dismissive client to be their own person, we're actually just re-ingraining their defenses in a different way. The client with the dismissive style needs help stepping in. The client with the preoccupied style needs help stepping out. And then fearful clients. Unfortunately, fearful clients get the worst of both worlds. So fearful clients, yes.
If you could, before we go on to fearful, can you go over a little bit more of why, like the difference of the parenting styles for dismissive?
We'll go over that with parenting styles. We just have probably should wrap up now. What time is it? 44. I got one more minute.
16 seconds.
In 16 seconds. Fearful clients, unfortunately, have the worst of both worlds. They do not have an organized structure or way of relating to the world. They don't have an organized attachment. And that's because these clients often experience extreme abuse and neglect. And we will pick up with parenting styles. We'll breeze through parenting styles, and then we will have a, whatever we do when we talk about emotions up here, role play on Thursday. Cool?